Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. The proposed Teck Frontier oil sands project in northeastern Alberta will be another divisive one. Opponents have already picketed the Environment Minister's office. The federal Conservatives are pushing for it to be approved. And as Todd Lamorand reports, today the Green Party called that approval a rubber stamp. But we start with yesterday's question period in the House of Commons.
After a 6-week break, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer wasted no time. His second question was about the oil sands project.
Will he do the right thing, stand with energy workers, and approve the Teck Resources Frontier mine, or will he stand with the activists and celebrities who are trying to shut it down?
Last Monday, activists and Indigenous leaders visited the office of Jonathan Wilkinson and handed staff of the Environment and Climate Change Minister a letter to not approve the Teck mine. On Tuesday, Wilkinson was asked whether Alberta is pressuring him to approve it.
But certainly with respect to this project, we need to look at all of the environmental impacts. We obviously need to look at the economic opportunities, and we need to ensure that we are taking both into account.
But at a press conference in the morning, Green Party MP Elizabeth May called approval of the Teck mine a foregone conclusion.
It's difficult to overturn the existing presumption in favor of approval of large oil and gas mega projects.
The Green Party said corporate influence over regulators and policymakers is higher than ever. May pointed to the conclusion of an environmental assessment panel about the Teck mine. It had reported there will be long-lasting massive environmental damage.
Even with that, the environmental assessment panel took it on itself to say, but the economic benefits outweigh this environmental damage.
And with this in mind, May says free, prior, and informed consent gets thrown out the window.
That the so-called consent that is granted is often coerced after a decision is made, and various First Nations end up feeling, well, we really don't have a choice here, and we need the money from a benefit agreement. What should we do?
The day before in question period, May asked Minister Wilkinson to turn down the Teck mine. Wilkinson responded that Cabinet will make a decision by the end of February and that advancing reconciliation will be one of the considerations. Todd Lamorand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
APTN recently reported on the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in Canada's prisons. Jody Wilson-Raybould was Canada's Justice Minister. That was before she was kicked out of the Liberal cabinet for not towing the party line on a criminal case involving a Quebec construction company. She had a question today about mandatory minimum sentences for the man who replaced her, Justice Minister David Lametti.
Canada's correctional investigator recently said the indigenization of Canada's prison population is nothing short of a national travesty. I agree, the TRC and calls for justice also agree. More action is required to address the over-incarceration of Indigenous, Black, and other marginalized Canadians. Evidence clearly shows that mandatory minimum penalties are a big part of the problem and is not smart justice policy. There's been enough study and too much delay due to political expediency. Can the government please confirm that it will repeal mandatory minimum penalties for all but the most serious of crimes?
I thank the honourable member for her question. Our government is committed to advancing sentencing reform that will stand the test of time. This means continuing to work with our provincial and territorial partners, with leaders from Indigenous communities, and all actors of the criminal justice system, as well as taking advice from our courts and listening to Canadians. We're committed to achieving a modern and efficient criminal justice system that addresses the tragic problem of overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples and marginalized Canadians while holding offenders to account and protecting victims.
Women in Nunavut are 13 times more likely to be the victim of violence than the national average. Now, a report from the group that represents Inuit women in Canada explains why Inuit women don't trust police and what could make things better. Our Kent Driscoll met with one Inuit woman who can see it from both sides through experience.
Yvonne Diego can see the problem from a few sides. She's an Inuit woman. She is Nunavut's Deputy Minister of Family Services, and she was an RCMP officer for 25 years. So when the Paututik Inuit Women of Canada asked for her input on a new report about how Inuit women are treated by RCMP, she wanted to help.
When Euro-Western style policing first came to Nunavut, it was by order of the federal government of the day out of Ottawa. Back in, especially during World War I, World War II, and of course, especially during the Cold War and the establishment of the DEW line in the name of sovereignty over the Arctic. So, of course, that's where policing first started, and that's a very short timeline for Inuit.
Those RCMP played a role in forcing Inuit into communities, in many cases by shooting the dogs that were their transportation. Today, the disconnect between Inuit women and police is based on that history, but it's different. The report says many Inuit see the RCMP as living in the community without being a part of it. Niego says the police would be available in the community more, but they have so many roles to play.
A lot of police officers in small communities have to perform multiple functions, not just policing. They have to be the ones to do all the administrative work, all the financial. It's like running a business. So.
The Pau-Tuktit report makes 15 recommendations on how to improve this relationship. Better training, longer postings so Mounties can learn their town, Inuktitut-speaking dispatchers. According to Niego's experience as an officer, and now as the Deputy Minister of Family Services, this lack of capacity frustrates the RCMP too.
In responding to domestic violence as a police officer, there's a way you deal with domestic violence in a respectful to the victim manner. However, you're on to the next call as a police officer, and you have to drop. You feel like you're dropping that victim because there aren't supports in place to leave them with and to ensure that whatever they're going through mentally and emotionally is taken care of. In southern jurisdiction and a big city, I'd have support services. I'd have a victim unit, somebody to leave that victim with.
And that's the catch when it comes to Nunavut. Policing, like every other government service, suffers from capacity. None of the issues the Pau-Tuktit report identifies are new. There have been calls for more Inuit RCMP, better integrated and supported RCMP, and more community involvement in policing since Nunavut was founded and before. Question is, will anything in this new report change anything? Ken Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
While convening in Montreal Monday, First Nations leaders and a lone representative of the Quebec government addressed recommendations put forth in the Viens Commission, kickstarted by Indigenous women who some feel were left out of the Commission's final report. Lindsay Richardson has the details.
Chiefs and council filed into the conference room, ready to take a seat at the discussion table. But one person who left an empty chair at this Viens Commission update was Premier François Legault. The decision not to attend emitted scrutiny from opposition leaders.
To go into reconciliation, let's say the chef de ma nation québécoise need to be sit with the First Nation chief.
And compounded uncertainty for First Nations leaders.
The other issue that was in the minds of many chiefs is the political relationship with Quebec. It took us 1 year before we managed to get the governor of that day to commit to a commission, which has done its work, and now we have a report, and we need to act quickly on the report.
Sent in his stead was Quebec's Indigenous Affairs Minister Sylvie Damour.
Ces deux rapports qui sont sur la table, moi, je n'ai pas fait une blague en disant que je ne voulais pas qu'ils soient sur la tablette et qu'ils prennent la poussière.
Just months after the release of the MMIWG National Inquiry Report came the Quebec-specific Viens Commission Report, an extensive 488-page document running the gamut of systemic issues faced by Indigenous peoples. A great shame on the province, according to its author.
Dans une société développée comme la nôtre, ce constat est tout simplement inacceptable.
The delegation of chiefs came to Montreal with a working plan to address relations, services, and political issues in increments. But speaking to reporters, Damour said she was concerned by certain omissions.
Je l'ai dit ouvertement devant les micros que je trouvais que ce rapport n'avait pas été assez loin pour les femmes de Val-d'Or.
The women who in 2015 alleged both physical and sexual abuse by officers with the provincial police force. When the province's prosecutor announced there wasn't enough evidence to lay criminal charges, it fueled both rage and sorrow.
Je crois pas qu'ils ont fait le tour de toutes les femmes, que toutes les femmes ils sont punies par le système québécois.
But the commission was born of the political backlash following this decision. After hearing thousands of testimonials all over Quebec, now the calls to action need to be implemented. Calls to Action 2 and 3, which involve the recognition and legislation of UNDRIP, is where the parties are snagged.
Il y a encore des femmes qui se font agresser, il y a encore des femmes qui disparaissent. Alors pour moi, c'est de l'empressement d'aider à travailler le plus rapidement possible pour aider ces femmes-là.
But of the 174 calls for action, none refer directly to the alleged abuse by police. Call to Action 87 implores Quebec to raise awareness about the nature of sexual assault. Number 38 asks Quebec to extend the statute of limitations for police ethics complaints to 3 years. Before even getting there, however, Picard says they'll need to appoint an oversight body to ensure the recommendations are applied.
If we feel that the system has failed our peoples, then we need to, give ourselves the proper means to change that.
While exchanging letters, Chief Picard and Premier Legault agreed to meet for a political and technical briefing sometime this spring. And while a date for that meeting has yet to be set, First Nations leaders say they're confident that the agenda certainly is. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
The coronavirus that originated in China is spreading across the world, and Vancouver has just confirmed its first case, making that 3 in Canada so far. The other 2 are from husband and wife from Toronto. The man in his 40s lives in Vancouver but travels to Wuhan City for work. The BC government says the man began showing symptoms 24 hours after returning home. He was aware of the virus and got tested. The results came back as a presumptive positive for coronavirus. A secondary test is being conducted now. He's in isolation at home. BC officials say they are closely monitoring travelers coming into the province.
The federal government, who is responsible for the warnings at the airport, will be expanding the area of concern, and that's because of what we're seeing happen in China right now. We know that it's broader than just Wuhan City, where there's ongoing transmission of this virus. But we have, in BC, had a very sensitive, we've been looking for people who have traveled anywhere in China and doing a detailed assessment, so it won't change the processes that we're using here now.
A northern community is in dire need of a new school that officials say it's helping for a high dropout rate. We'll tell you all about that after the break. First, here's tomorrow's weather for eastern and central Canada. Off to St. John's, we got -1 in snow, -7s for Charlottetown and Fredericton. Happy Valley Goose Bay snowy and -11, -19 with a mix of sun and cloud for Kuujjuaq. Sept-Îles, -12 and mostly sunny skies. Montreal, -5 and sunshine. North Bay, -9 and sunny. Sarnia, -1 and snow. Capus, Casing and Timmins, mostly sunny skies. -12 degrees. -8 with a mix of sun and cloud for Sioux Lookout. -6s and snow for Thompson and God's Lake and Norway House. -5 for Puckatawagan and the Paw. -7 in snow for Winnipeg. -6 in snow for Brandon. -3 and sunny skies for Regina and Swift Current and Estevan. -5 and mostly sunny in Saskatoon. -4 with a mix of sun and cloud for La Ronge and Meadow Lake and Stony Rapids and Uranium City, but -2 and cloudy for Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. The government of the Northwest Territories will have some explaining to do next month. The Auditor General is visiting Yellowknife to give a report on the government's failed delivery of adequate education in the north. Our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs profiles one of many schools that are driving kids to drop out. Here's that story.
In remote communities across the Northwest Territories, schools are struggling to meet curriculum standards. Colville Lake is no exception. According to staff, students are dropping out before they can even write or complete basic math.
They only come maybe till grade 6 and then they'll quit, or grade 9 and then they'll give up. They'll say, okay, well, there's no use for me to go because there's no support.
It's 18.
Linda Manuel is the only instructor out of 6 actually from the area. Her classroom has a blanket for a door, and with no real walls, not much privacy for teaching.
The child can't concentrate because they could hear someone talking English over here.
Manuel says the one-room log house and tiny second school are crowded.
I really want a big classroom for their language. I could make a teepee and a tent in here. I can't take it out, there's no room. So the high school, I know they said they want space themselves, they want their own classroom, or they want a locker where they could put their belongings.
A new school has been in the works for over a decade. Roughly 40 residents in the community are school age, and the young population is growing. Students here have many suggestions on how to improve the quality of their education. Justin Couchon wants to be a heavy-duty mechanic. He says he would have benefited from shop and tech classes had they been offered. He also didn't grow up playing sports. That's because students have to walk a ways to access a small and old gym down the road.
Attendance, yeah, it's kind of an issue. Sometimes most kids would be late by an hour or something.
And then why do you think kids miss school early?
Because probably like the work doesn't really start too soon, so they just come like a half hour late so it could finally start.
Online courses are not offered because of slow internet speed, so some students cannot take prerequisite courses needed for post-secondary. 10 students have transferred out of Colville this school year alone. Have you had any of your friends move away, though, for school at all?
Yeah.
Why did they move away?
Probably because they wanted to move away, but the parents also said they wanted to get them better education because they don't think they get it as good as here.
What do you think? Do you think that's true?
Kind of true, actually, yeah.
APTN visited Colville in 2008, where students had gone without running water or a proper washroom for 8 years. Not much has changed. But it may get worse before it gets better. As the school's population goes down, so does the funding. Colville Lake may lose a teacher next year if students continue to leave.
I think one of the problems that we have in those small schools is that we're, like small schools like in Colville Lake, is that we're based on the same formula funding, based on enrollment, which is probably not right for our small schools. I think our schools like this should be a need to exist school, so it has to have a basic programming along the way.
The Sahtu MLA promised to make Colville Lake School a priority, but there is no date or location set for when and where a new school will go. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Colville Lake.
The Grand Chief of Manitoba's Southern Chiefs Organization is hopeful that Bill C-92 will live up to its goal of reworking the Indigenous child welfare system. Jerry Daniels is Dennis Ward's guest on an all-new episode of Face to Face tonight. He believes jurisdiction and funding need to be transferred over to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit control. Take a look.
We don't need bureaucrats dictating policy to us. That page in our history needs to turn, and we need to move into a new era where we are in full control. And so that's been my hope with 92. If we can remove the province, I think that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. We need less people involved in our affairs. And I think that the more that we're able to do that, and we're going to make mistakes, and people are going to make mistakes, but you know what? That's what humans have that's how we've become better. And I think that we're all committed to making our children's lives better.
-1 in snow for high level, zeros for Fort Chip and Fort McMurray and snow there. +2 and cloud for Edmonton, 8 and rain in Lethbridge. Tofino and Victoria are cloudy and rainy and 10 degrees. Same with Campbell River, 6 for Quesnel and cloud there. Dease Lake, mostly sunny skies and 2 degrees. Prince George, 5 and rain. Dawson City, snow and -22, -26 and snow up in Old Crow. Norman Wells, snow and -29. Wateen, -14 and snow. Fort McPherson, -28 and snow. Paulatuck, cloudy and -28. Cambridge Bay, mostly clear and -28, -12 and sunshine for Chesterfield. Tallyoak, -30 and cloud. Pangertown, mix of sun and cloud and -27. Cape Dorset, -12 and snow. Welcome back. In Whitehorse, the Council of Yukon First Nations announced the launch of culturally specific programming for family support workers. The goal of the Yukon First Nations Family Support Worker Program is to reduce the number of Yukon First Nations children in the child welfare system. Participants will learn how to incorporate traditional knowledge into their practices and self-care strategies when assisting families and children in need within these communities. Brenda Asp is a family support worker with the Champagne and Aishk First Nation. She says that it's important to work together to keep communities and families together.
I've witnessed vulnerability within our people with trauma and addiction hurt that comes along with that. So I think when we work together to help each other, it helps alleviate some of that.
A former chief of Siksika Nation near Calgary has written a book looking at the challenges and opportunities Indigenous leaders face when they are elected into positions of power, because often they find that they have no power at all. Leroy Paul Wolfcaller spoke to APTN's Chris Stewart at his book signing.
Leroy Paul Wolfcaller was councillor for over a decade and chief for one term. He decided to put pen to paper and write about his experiences as leader. He says many new leaders have good intentions, but that soon reality takes over.
Once you get into that political arena, it's a total different world. You find out really fast you're not sovereign, you're not self-governing, and you govern under the auspices of the federal government's Indian Act. In other words, you're an agent of the federal government.
His book is called First Nations Self-Government, 17 Roadblocks to Self-Determination, and one chief's thoughts on solutions. One of the roadblocks he mentions is a lack of secondary education for leaders. Wolfcaller would like to see a mandatory degree for leadership candidates.
A lot of our elected chiefs and council don't have that academic credential. Yes, they're smart people. They're also culturally smart, but the missing component is that academic requirement. We need to encourage our up-and-coming leaders to acquire that education.
Wolfcaller gives tips to young and aspiring leaders. He emphasizes that education is key. He says he is optimistic about the future leaders.
Absolutely. I mean, having said all of these things that I've experienced in our community and seen some of the dismal things that happen from time to time, there's the flop side of it where we have a lot of young, aspiring, strong people that are going to have a lot of success in their life. I'm optimistic that, we're hopeful. And our young people are getting more and more educated.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Siksika Nation, Alberta.
That's your news for this Tuesday night. I will leave you with this from the Métis Pavilion at the Westman Multicultural Festival this past weekend in Brandon, Manitoba. Jacob and Sienna Harris wowed the crowd with their Red River Jig. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.